Hi, everybody. It's my pleasure to inform you that tonight we're going to have a delightful conversation between David Smalley and Josh Brister, and we're going to talk about atheism and Christianity and which one makes most sense. And so we're going to have more of a conversation than a debate, but we are going to start it off with 5 minutes for each side just to give an overview of their positions. So without further ado, I guess we'll start with Josh because Josh was the first one in here. So here we go.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I apologize if I have to take off my glasses. My vision is not as good as it once was. Okay. Start when I start reading. 5 minutes. August 8th, 1966, Time magazine published and ran an issue with the question, "Is God dead?" on its cover. But just as Time magazine had raised the question of God's existence in light of the supposed death of God, and which pronounced God altogether dead the next year, a remarkable change took place. Merely a few years later, Time ran on the cover, "Is God coming back to life?" Quentin Smith has really highlighted this. Quentin Smith was the one of the most renowned atheist philosophers of all time. And he says, and I quote, "God is not dead in academia. He returned to life in the late 1960s and is now alive and well in his last academic stronghold, philosophical departments." I think the new atheists and a lot of the atheists on the internet are unaware of this fact. Theism and Christian theism in particular has had a revolution, a renaissance in learning. And I think we need to take that instead of just, saying that Christianity is irrational like the new atheists do. So I think there's good arguments for the existence of God and for thinking that Christianity is true. And I think this really comes to bear when we're talking about explanation. I submit that theism, Christian theism in particular, and not atheism or materialism, best explains a whole wide variety of phenomena. For example, theism explains properly basic beliefs, such as the existence of other minds, causation, or the existence of the external world. It has a basis for morality. Atheism does not have a basis for morality. Like the Russian novelist and philosopher Fyodor Dostoevsky said, if God does not exist, all things are permissible. This was something that was highlighted by the atheist existentialists and Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, and others. So I think we really have to take the philosophical and lived life implications of atheism and theism seriously as a worldview. On top of that, I think common sense shows that there are great arguments for the existence of God. I just want to ask David, does he believe in change? Well, how does he account for change in the world? So I would really like him to give an explanation of change. And instead of reducing all of the phenomenal world to the level of physics, I think we need to take reality and live life seriously and be open to the possibility of the existence of God rather than making a priori philosophical explaining away of the evidence that you will hear tonight. Lastly, I think to talk about explanation again, theism provides a rational explanation of why the universe exists. Why, as in Gottfried Leibniz says, why does anything at all exist instead of nothing? Atheism cannot give an answer to this. And for centuries, atheists have tried and they've failed miserably. So I think I would just hope that any atheist listening to this dialogue would look at the evidence anew with an open heart and an open mind, and follow the evidence, not just make philosophical pronouncements or explaining away the evidence, or think that you don't have to carry the burden or some of the burden of proof here. Atheists and theists both have a burden of proof, and I think from the 1960s on, with that renaissance in Christian philosophy, I think Christianity has a great answer for the atheist. That is, that God does exist and that God raised Jesus from the dead. And I hope to get into all these arguments. Thank you.
Welcome, or wonderful. Welcome, listen to me. Welcome, everybody who's in the chat is what I also wanted to say, but thank you so much for opening. And let's go over to David Smalley. And I forgot to mention, we have Christian Resistance is Josh's channel, and David has a website, davidcsmalley.com. And so he also runs the Dogma Debate. So here we go.
First, SJ, thank you for having me. This is always a lot of fun. The podcast hasn't been called Dogma Debate for about 2 years now. It's the David C. Smalley podcast. I'm a skeptic comedian. For those who don't know who I am, I'm a skeptic comedian, and I bring on people with differing views and ask them why they believe what they believe and request evidence and things like that. It started as atheist versus Christian. It's not so much anymore. I still do some of that, but that's not the entire focus. First, I just want to say in response to that, and thank you, Josh, for reaching out to me and wanting to have the debate. I think our first interaction was over Twitter, where you were making some pretty harsh comments about atheists and broad brush statements about atheism. And people kept tagging me saying, this is the guy you should talk to. This is the guy you should talk to. Because I guess you were saying I want to debate some atheist. And then when I reached out and said, sure, I'll be happy to have you on my show, you said, I want someone with more academic credentials or something, and kind of blew me off. And so this started a little weird for me. I didn't know if you were someone who was serious about having a dialogue or someone who just wanted to trash atheists online. So I wanted to do it like this because this is a much more, I guess, palatable way to have a conversation as opposed to Twitter.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And so I think this entire thing is kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of the job of atheism. Like, I feel like saying that atheism fails to explain the existence of the universe, or atheism fails to explain morality, is kind of like putting your chocolate cake in the dishwasher and then being angry that it didn't bake it properly. Atheism is not a system of thought that is designed to explain those types of things. It's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I'm sorry, is that a squeaky toy or something? That's
yeah, it's our dog Sugar.
I thought you got bored and was maybe playing with one.
Maybe mute.
I'm just playing.
Josh, maybe mute when he's talking. Just so.
Okay.
So I think that saying that atheism should be held up as a versus Christianity is a little bit of a misunderstanding as well. David Eller writes in his book Atheism Advanced many years ago that I actually quoted in my book, and I think I released mine in 2010. So it was earlier than that. He writes in there that atheism is not opposite any one religion, but outside of them all. So it would make perfect sense for you to have a Muslim on and debate the Muslim and say, I think Christian morality is superior to Muslim morality. And then you guys can argue about prophecy and scripture and things like that, because you both make those similar claims. Atheism is not directly opposite your belief. It is outside of your belief, saying, I just don't think you have enough evidence for me to believe. But when it comes to how the universe came into existence, there are theoretical physicists who disagree about that. There's a general consensus about the Big Bang and the singularity, but there are also very prominent voices talking about string theory and multiverse theory. And hell, there are people positing that we could be, an experiment of, from a higher race of evolved beings like aliens from another planet that put us here. I mean, to put it into perspective, you can fit 1 million Earths inside of our sun. There is a sun out there that is another star out there that's 3.7 billion times the size of our sun. And then just the other day, I saw that there's another star that they found that's 10 billion times larger than our sun. So you just think about how long it takes me to, drive halfway across the country to get to my mom's house, and then go 1 million of those can fit into our sun, and then 3 billion of those can fit into another star. We could be fleas on something's back. How incredibly tiny we are is just fascinating to me. So there are people with very high degrees in theoretical physics who say, yeah, we don't know yet. We're looking into it, and we're finding out that dark matter has weight. We're finding out ways to measure things. We're finding ways to sort of look in the past in a way through radiation in the galaxy. There's fun stuff to look into, but atheism is not making any solid claim that we have all of the answers. We know all of this. You better learn it too, lest you be tortured. It's just not a compatible, equal opponent to Christianity. It's sort of outside of that, saying, I just don't believe your evidence. And as far as the morality part, I don't know why that always comes up. I guess we can get into that. I want to make that part of the conversation, but I don't want to take any more time in the beginning. So I'll just leave it with that. I've got a note here about that you said that atheists have no basis in morality, and I'm sure we can get into that in a moment. So I'll just end my time there, just to say that I think that you're kind of putting atheism, propping it up as though it is a religious belief, and then trying to make it responsible for answering questions that theism pretends to know the answers to but can't prove it. And atheists go, oh, there's a specific scientific study of that. Like there's evolution is there to talk about how species change over time. Abiogenesis is there to talk about how life began on Earth that we're still looking into. Theoretical physicists are trying to discuss how the Earth came to being and why the nothingness is expanding and how does that even make sense. Atheism, it has nothing to say about any of that. Atheism is only the answer to one question. Do you believe in any of the gods proposed? Not so far. So it's a little bit unfair to try to make atheism responsible for answering all these questions it doesn't claim to know about.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So I'm just going to open it up and let you two have at it.
Thank you. First of all, atheism is the belief that God does not exist. And this is how Dr. Graham Oppy, someone who I've dialogued with twice, perhaps the top atheist philosopher in the world, has defined it. And I don't have it with me, but I have a whole litany of sources that discuss this. Atheism is the belief that God or gods do not exist, and therefore it needs some type of justification.
That's just not true. I disagree, and
I can give you the sources.
I don't care what, but Josh, I have no sacred cows. I do not care that an atheist with a PhD disagrees with me. I do not profess a positive belief that there is no God.
Then you're not an atheist.
Yes, I am. Atheism,
but you claim that, but you're not taking the historical, philosophical definition of what atheism is.
When you break down the etymology of how the word atheism came to be, the A is without. Theism is your belief. I'm without your belief. I don't have to make I don't have a God that I believe in. So what am I?
Okay, what if I give you all those sources from academic sources? You talked about the size of the universe, how gigantic and expanding it is. I think you're probably talking about learned, credible astrophysicists, credible sources, but you won't take credible sources in philosophy and in encyclopedias that how they define atheism.
Well, you're talking about you're talking about one thing that is measurable when you get into expansion of the universe and age of the universe and things that are mathematical equations that can be written out by theoretical physicists versus a guy's opinion. And I don't want to get caught up in the weeds because people will stop watching or stop listening to this because it just doesn't matter. I do not claim a positive belief. I do not claim knowledge that I know there is no God.
Then you're not an atheist.
That's not true. Most atheists do not make that claim. Most atheists will tell you, I just don't believe in any of the gods proposed. And
okay, then
being without a theism means you're an atheist. And there's no point in even continuing that part of the conversation.
All right.
It's just over.
All right. I believe that you're wrong. And my belief is based on numerous academic sources and encyclopedias that I could give, but I'll move on for the sake of the discussion.
Well, you can find tons and tons of atheists also with credentials that will say the same thing I'm saying. So it just doesn't matter. And even if that were the case, even if that were the case, there is no atheist like manifesto that demands we all say and believe the same thing in order to have an end to something.
Well, there are tendencies.
Atheism does not make a specific claim about the beginning of the universe. Not
according to those sources, not according to the academic sources, but we can move on.
No, because you're not. Look, it's not atheism that's making the claim. A theoretical physicist, say Lawrence Krauss, for example, theoretical physicist, who makes a claim and says, I don't believe there's any God, or as far as I can see, there is no God, or something like that, that he is an atheist, but he's making the claim based off of theoretical physics. Atheism is an opinion. It's a thought. It's an idea. It's a disbelief in a God, or it's a lack of a belief. It's a lack of a belief in a God that you've proposed. It's not a scientific field of study that demands answers. It's just
it's a worldview question upon looking at the evidence, trying to make a rational view, understanding of the evidence that we have. Madeleine Murray O'Hair, the atheist, she passed away, I believe, in the 90s. She said that a person that calls themselves an atheist but defines it that way is just mistaken. It's a person that doesn't want to shoulder their burden of proof. Now, I don't want to stay on this. I will go on. But what I'm saying is I study philosophy, and I have numerous academic sources that I could give. In fact, I don't have it right here.
Let me ask you this. And by the way, I was the editor of American Atheist magazine for 2 years, and that was an original position Madeleine Murray O'Hair held. I was a part of the American Atheist organization for several years. I know all about her history. I would say 85% of the things she said I agreed with. There were things that she said I disagree with, and I don't let. See, as a theist, maybe it's a difficult concept because this isn't the way you operate within your theism. I don't let people who are higher up in my worldview dictate what I believe or dictate how I refer to myself. If I am lacking a belief in any God, I do not have a God that I believe in, that is by definition atheist. I am atheistic without theism. It's that simple. Now, if you want to dive down and say, well, are you an agnostic atheist? I think everyone is agnostic to some degree. I think you are an agnostic Christian. You are missing some knowledge, but with the knowledge you do have, you formed a belief about it. I am without knowledge, obviously, but with the knowledge I have, I've examined the God claims, and I lack a belief in them. I
I don't think we lack a belief. You either believe something on this question. For example, all these arguments that I could give, and we'll move on now. I asked you about the basis of change. How do you account for change? But then you said in your opening, you talked about the size of the universe. It doesn't matter how big the universe is or how old it is, which I believe it's billions of years old. But even if it's very small, you have to give a sufficient explanation for why it exists rather than nothing. Okay.
Why do I have to give a sufficient explanation to satisfy you?
Because there's a reason why it exists.
But
it doesn't.
Okay, that's fine. There could be a reason. Why do I have to give a reason for that in order to not have a belief in a God?
If I present a philosophical argument, for the explanation of why the universe exists, well, I think it's incumbent upon the atheist to either undercut it or say that his atheism is a mere faith belief. Now, let me give the argument. Let me see what you think. Here's the from Limnis. Everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is in an external, transcendent, personal cause. Now, the universe exists. We all grant that. Therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is an external, transcendent, personal cause. Theism gives the explanation for why the universe exists rather than just nothing. Atheism, despite the evidence, because whenever you observe anything in reality, you always seek an explanation. It's conspicuous that only when it comes to the universe as a whole that the atheist raises up his hands and says he's uncertain. But theism provides that explanation. Don't you think that it's superior in that regard?
Not at all. Putting forth a false answer or an answer you can't prove is probably worse than having no answer at all. There was a time when people believed that Horus, the sun god, was dragging the sun across the sky with a chariot. You're aware of this, right? And if we were standing there and I say to you, look at that, Horus is dragging the sun across the sky with a magic chariot. And you say to me, I don't think that makes sense. Do you have to then come up with an equally acceptable answer in order for my belief to not be true? Or are you allowed to have your objection to my ridiculous belief that there's a horse-drawn chariot pulling a big fire globe across the sky? I mean, you being skeptical of my claim is perfectly fine. And you can say, I don't believe it. And when I say, why am I skeptical? And then when I say, well, then you show me how else it could happen. And you go, I don't know for sure. I have a couple of thoughts, but I don't know for sure. But the idea of a horse-drawn chariot pulling a fireball is crazy to me. That would be like me going, yeah, but you have no explanation, therefore I win. No,
I think that's a straw man.
That's not the way, but that's not the way any of this works.
But so that's a straw man.
I'm allowed to say that I think your presentations and your answers, that theism's explanations for life, theism's explanation for morality or whatever, I'm allowed to say those fall short without having something that satisfies you as to be the correct answer. I can say, I just don't believe it.
It seems to me, in my argument for the contingency from Gottfried Leibniz, the contingency of the universe is only one argument in a comprehensive case for Christian theism. It's like the analogy of a medieval knight that wears chainmail. You have all these links that are supporting the chainmail. So it's not just for one reason or for one outlier, but all these arguments for the existence of God. And that's only one I gave, but they point to theism being true rather than atheism. And notice this this argument has a long history, as well as other arguments that I haven't mentioned. And I'm given a positive argument for why the universe exists rather than nothing at all. The explanation for why the universe exists is because God holds it in existence. A transcendent eternal cause holds it in existence. Now, the atheist can undercut that claim, but somehow he can try, but it doesn't seem that he is rational, because he's simply walking away and turning his blind eye.
No, he's not turning
to
a
the
blind eye.
evidence.
No. We're not turning a blind eye. What we're saying is that your evidence doesn't make sense, and that whatever answer we're trying to come to, or whatever question we're trying to answer, your explanation falls short of being within reality. So we will continue to say, and the intellectual honest position would be to say, we don't know, we're looking into it, and we hope to find out someday, as opposed to filling that gap with a God and saying, nope, it's God, that's the best answer. Throughout history, there have been thousands and thousands of gods put into gaps because people didn't understand something. And inevitably, what do? We find a natural explanation for that, and the need for that God goes away. We don't have to throw a virgin into a volcano to get corn crops to grow. We now understand the science behind growing crops, right? We don't have to sacrifice our firstborn in order to get rain. We understand what brings rain now because of meteorology. As humans begin to advance and continue to advance, we are checking off the need for God after God after God. And it's my opinion that it's only a matter of time before your God gets checked off. We're just not completely there and can't answer every one of your questions yet. But I think it's much more honest to say we don't know yet, but magic is not an acceptable response.
Well, magic is.
Well, let me interject really quickly. I wanted to see, because what David's doing, and I kind of wanted to turn this into a direction that might be interesting for the viewers too. But David's talking about lots of gods, and I wanted to see if Josh, if you want to answer that with the differentiation between your specific beliefs in Christianity over these other belief systems, and then maybe David can talk to why he rejects those specific beliefs.
Okay,
that's why you get the big bucks, SJ.
We can certainly get into that, but I want to say, just as science has a long history of progressive sophistication and learning, theology, the study of God, does also. So because there was an imprecise explanation for why things existed in reality, that doesn't mean we should throw out the baby with the bathwater and accept an anti-supernaturalistic view that precludes the possibility of the existence of God. My argument was part of a comprehensive case for theism. You mentioned science. Theism explains the predictability of natural processes in the world. Naturalism or atheism can't explain any of that because it lacks a causal, something to account for change. That's why in my opening, I asked, how do you account for change? And before you answer that, I want to say something to what you said in your opening about the expansion of the universe. Alexander Vilenkin, one of the world's leading cosmologists, is blunt about the Big Bang. And he talks about the expansion.
Josh, are we just going to ignore what SJ asked us to do? Because I'm ready to have that conversation about your specific God.
We'll get to it. We'll get to
it.
And
I can talk about change. I can talk about naturalism. I can talk about evolution and Darwin's theories. I don't have a problem with addressing adaptation and evolutionary change. But I feel like you're going back into quoting yet another person that's not you. And I would like to talk to you about your beliefs.
Well, you quoted somebody, and I was quoting, wanted to quote somebody that talked about the expansion of the universe, Alexander Vilenkin. So let me just do this, and then we'll progress with the discussion. He says about the implications about the beginning of the universe. He says, and I quote, "It is said that an argument is what convinces a reasonable man, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." So this is another argument. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. This is the second argument. So you have the contingency argument, and now the Kalam cosmological argument, which tends to put the atheist in an uncomfortable situation, because I think it does show.
It's only uncomfortable because it's been debunked for the last 10 years repeatedly, and I don't know why it keeps coming up in these conversations.
Which premise?
This is William Lane Craig's nonsense,
Yes.
And I'm just exhausted with these.
Which
I've probably dealt with this 50 times over 500 episodes. Like I'm just exhausted with it, Josh. Again, there are theoretical physicists dealing with the ideas of the beginning of the universe. There are conflicting educated ideas about string theory, multiverse theory. Perhaps this universe came out of the explosion of another universe. We don't know. We don't know what happened right before the Big Bang. It would be interesting to find out. We would love to know. But saying that a magical eternal being did it is not good enough. That's
a caricature.
Saying.
That's a caricature of what theism actually is, David.
Is it not? Hold on. Do you not believe God can say stuff and make things happen? Because that's magical. And do you not?
That's not magic. That's not the definition of magic. Magic is the manipulation of natural processes. God, by definition, is a supernatural being that transcends space and time. So they're two different things.
But hold on. But don't you believe that supernatural being can change the physical natural world? Magic.
Yes. That's not magic. That's a low-level understanding of theology.
You just said it was the manipulation of natural processes, and you said that
by a natural cause.
You said that you believe that your supernatural being can manipulate natural processes.
God is
how you described magic. No. I know that it makes you uncomfortable to use the word magic. I'm not trying to offend you. I'm just saying that.
My position.
No, it's not. It's a simplification.
Let me explain. The supernatural.
Because at the end of the day, if you believe that there is an eternal being who has always existed, that literally spoke all of this into existence,
but that's not magic.
Let me finish. The Earth coming into existence is a natural process, and if your supernatural being,
it wouldn't have come into existence without God. You're caricaturing the Kalam cosmological argument.
Josh, it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. Just let me say it, be uncomfortable with it, and then respond with however you want to respond. But talking over me is not going to end well for any of us. Okay? Sure. It's not going to be good for the people watching or listening. It's not going to be good for SJ's channel. It's not going to be good for the podcast. Let's have the discussion. You said that magic was the manipulation of natural processes. The earth in itself is natural. The trees are natural. Trees growing out of the ground, animals existing. If you believe Genesis and you believe in the Christian God, then you believe a supernatural being spoke into existence things like the earth, things like trees, and things like animals that occur naturally, which means You believe he manipulated natural processes, which is your definition of magic. So I'm not trying to be
That's
facetious or offensive. It's just a quick way to get the point across that me saying you have this always existing eternal being whose magic is not good enough for me does not mean I'm now on the chopping block to have a different version of that being that I never claimed to believe in. I don't know what
okay.
started the universe. I'm okay with that. We're looking into it. But I'm not making some positive claim that here's exactly what I know. And as a matter of fact, I talk to that creator of the universe every night before I go to bed, and he tells me things and I have a relationship with him. That is another level of delusion. So I'm not stating that, and me stating that I don't believe you is the very essence of atheism.
Well, what I'm doing is trying to give arguments. And what I said was the difference between a supernatural agent, which transcends the universe and which brought it into existence. I gave two arguments for that, that contingency argument and the Kalam cosmological argument. I tried to delineate what magic was, the natural manipulation of nature. I should have also added the cause or the origination is from natural processes. Without a supernatural intervention, there would be no beginning of the universe. For this, I quoted Alexander Vilenkin, and I could quote others like the eminent, and I won't quote him, I'll just say it, the eminent British cosmologist Christopher Isham. I could also bring up Paul Davies. I could bring up Stephen Hawking in his new book, The Nature of Space and Time in 1996. He does the same gesture, says basically the same thing. I have whole lines of quotes that show the beginning of the universe makes the atheist very uncomfortable. And with all due respect, David, your dismissal of the Kalam cosmological argument, I think, is right in line with that. That argument
no,
in
it's
particular.
not an uncomfortable dismissive. Let me just be very clear. It's not an uncomfortable dismissing. It's that once again, you are trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You're saying that in order for an atheist to say they don't believe you, they must have an alternate explanation. And that's not logical. An atheist can say your explanation falls short of reality without having something else to offer. And that's why the Kalam cosmological argument is pointless in these debates. I don't have an equal and opposite position of you. My position is I don't believe your proposition. I would say the same thing to Native American believers who say I have these list of gods who I think created the universe. I would say the same thing to Jews. I would say the same thing to Muslims. I'd say the same thing to Hindus. I just don't believe in these supernatural beings. I don't have to offer you some other alternate explanation in order to say yours falls short of believable. It's that simple.
Yep, theism does explain all these things. Atheism
No, it doesn't.
is, well, I haven't given all the arguments, and I hope to continue to keep going with all these arguments.
I would love for you to continue with your specific God instead of a deistic, causal first, action God. Let's get into your specific God, like SJ asked us to, because after all, this is her platform.
What I was trying to do is delineate a cumulative case. I think the existence of God is, I think it's clear so far from the two arguments, the contingency argument from Limnes and the Kalam cosmological argument from various Islamic and Jewish and Christian scholars that have given it all throughout the ages, Bonaventure as well. I could go on various other arguments. I in my opening, I asked you what accounts for change. Would you like to try to answer that question? I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess it depends on. It's a very vague question, to be fair. I don't know if you mean change naturally or change of someone's mind or whatever, but depending on how specific your question would get, I could slightly make my answer a little more specific. But to offer a vague answer back to a vague question, I would say environmental adaptability.
Okay. For the possibility of environmental adaptability, or for changing one's mind, or for any change at all to happen in the world, like me moving my hand, for example, how do you explain that change? Let me just ask you, what do you how would you define change of any type?
I don't really understand what you're asking. Like, it's such a vague question. I mean, what do you mean,
Well,
just change? Like, if a frog farts in the water, is that evidence of God? Like, I'm not sure exactly what the hell you're talking about, to be honest.
I
You
think,
moved your pen. Okay, you moved your pen. There are neurons in your brain. There are synapses in your brain that are connecting. You're making a decision to do this, and it's happening because your brain controls your hand. I don't know how physical and medical you want me to get, but I don't know what this has to do with Christianity, because this
well,
was supposed to be Christianity versus atheism,
yeah,
and we've
and
had
it's a cumulative case.
right, but you've spent the first 41 minutes
Well, I'll
specifically
go
on
on
this
after this one.
deistic first cause argument, despite our
How do you
lovely
know?
host asking us to move on. So I'm not sure what you're getting at here, Josh.
Well, I was going to discuss the moral argument, and you could and I'll do that in a minute. You could well say, well, that's just your deistic understanding. I think, again, all this is a cumulative case, and I gave the analogy of a medieval knight's chainmail. I just think it shows the weakness of atheism, because change is the actualization of a potential. In our common sense experience of the world around us, of flowers growing, of people going to work, whatever, we have to account for that change somehow. So for the
No, we
world,
don't,
or
Josh.
the
Josh,
well,
once again, you just
what
said
accounts for a
you
change?
you you just said it shows a weakness of atheism, because atheism doesn't give an answer for change. Think about these words, man. Atheism, lacking a belief in a God, has
That's
to
not
give you
atheism.
an answer, has to give you an answer for why you're moving your pen. You're you're setting up straw men for
Here,
atheism to easily. Let me finish, Josh. Jeez.
all right.
You're setting up atheism to fail over and over, because you're trying to make it address things it doesn't address. Now, if you want to take let's say a physicist and say, how do you explain this aspect of a ball rolling? And he starts talking about the physics of it, and then gives you a wrong answer. And another physicist can go, you got that wrong. That's not why the ball reacted that way. It reacted this way. It's your Catholicism that made you answer incorrectly. That's a giant leap. Like, the things that make change happen have to do with physics and environmental change and adaptability,
Physics.
and probably countless variables. So once again, you're trying to make atheism answer something
Okay.
that has nothing to do with atheism.
Yeah,
That's not an
okay.
atheist proposition.
Gotcha. You said physics explains the change, or is a good option, a live option. Now, what accounts for the law-like structure of the universe that physics governs? Do you think, it seems to me that theism, something that a being that exists outside of time and space, and keeps all the change, it holds it together in actualization. There must be a purely actualizer that gives the possibility for any change in the world. That seems like that's a third argument for the existence of God. It's one argument that Ed Feser discusses in his book, 5 Proofs for the Existence of God.
My goodness, is this a debate or reading Rainbow?
Well, I read a lot. That's why I'm a theist.
Okay, so now we're going to go with the ad hominem attacks, just like on your Twitter account.
No, I'm
right.
I'm not. So, I'm not being an ad hominem. What I'm trying to do is give scholarly what a lot of scholars hold.
Well, no, what you're giving me, and this happens a lot, by the way. I've done these debates for, like I said, 11 years. It happens quite often that the theist comes on one of these shows and just gives a list after list after list of what smart-sounding people said many, many years ago, and what this other guy says. And here's a quote, and it's a thing that happens over and over and over and over. This is supposed to be about Christianity. This is supposed to be about your belief and you saying that Christianity is superior to atheism. We're 45 minutes in, Josh. You haven't made a single argument about Christianity, but you've told me what a lot of people think about.
I think it's true. I certainly think Christianity is true.
Let's get into that. Let's get into your version of Christianity. We're 45 minutes into this. What the 45 about Christianity makes it superior?
Oh, okay, but the 45 minutes were preparatory information to show that we have a good basis for why God exists. And if God created the universe and caused it into existence, then it seems no problem that God could raise Jesus from the dead. I think you have to be open to the possibility of miracles rather than turning your head or your eyes away from the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus.
So to me, it's not that theism provides a good explanation or even an explanation at all. I guess it is an explanation. But back to my Horus example of Horus dragging the sun through the sky. There were people who actually believed that. That was a real thing at the time. To me, imagine like 4 people standing around and one guy goes, yeah, that's Horus. Horus is at it again. Look at him pulling that sun across the sky using a chariot and a horse. And then another guy next to him goes, nah, that's my friend Jose. He does that every morning. And then someone else goes, no, that's Billy. I know for sure that's Billy because Billy talks to me every night before I go to sleep. Billy's the one pulling that sun across the sky. The atheist is the one standing there going, I don't think any of you have enough evidence for me to believe any of your statements. And then if all 3 of them turn around and go, well, then how do you think it happens? And he goes, I don't know, but a dude pulling it across the sky sounds ridiculous to me. I don't know how it happens, but I think it sounds ridiculous. If they all start high-fiving, yeah, that atheist is ridiculous. He can't account for this. Not being able to account for something that you don't know about does not mean everyone else is telling the truth. My failure to give you an adequate answer to some deeply asked question by philosophers and physicists, my failure to do that does not suddenly validate your argument, making you correct. That's just not how any of this works. So for the last time, atheism is not set up to answer those types of questions. There are specific fields that do. And then I think if you want to spend time on those fields, you should talk with experts in those fields. I'm an atheist because I don't believe that your God claim is sufficient for me to believe it.
The reason why I'm not an atheist is because I think theism best explains a whole wide variety of phenomena. I said this in my opening, not just the phenomena of the historical evidence for the life and death and ministry of Jesus, but from the beginning of the universe, why it exists at all, the fine-tuning, objective moral values and duties, free will, qualia. There's a whole host, but when we come to the resurrection of Jesus, it seems like theism provides a comprehensive explanation rather than reducing explanations to the level of physics. So if there is a God that created the universe, it seems to make the resurrection more probable than not if there wasn't evidence for the beginning of the universe.
Listen, I agree with that. I would agree with that.
Okay.
If if your God exists, it would make that more plausible. The problem is you don't have sufficient evidence that God exists to begin with. You have evidence that you accept, but it's not evidence that I accept. I don't believe you have sufficient evidence. So a person coming back from the dead and floating to the sky is no more believable than a God speaking the earth into existence. Both of those sound like fairy tales to me, and I do not believe them. I don't have an explanation to offer to at least a valid sounding explanation to offer to say, here's exactly how it happened. But that doesn't mean that your argument is suddenly true.
It seems to me, and I hope to go in more into the resurrection of Jesus, but it seems to me that a person with an open mind and, an open heart could say theism at least attempts to explain a wide variety of this phenomena, not just backing away at the various lines of argument that I've been given. I think we kind of do have a probabilistic case based on arguments for or the criteria of authenticity that historians normally use. For example, all of this happened in Jerusalem, the very city where Jesus was condemned. So the criteria of embarrassment, it argues against that, because surely they wouldn't have placed Jesus in the very city where the Jewish authorities were and could investigate and would be more in line to debunk the resurrection than not. So it's an argument that for their trustworthiness of the Gospels, and even of things that predate the Gospels, like creedal statements in the New Testament itself, that some scholars, in fact many, with 1 Corinthians 15, and I saw your dialogue with Rendell Rouser, he discusses this also, that creedal formula that most scholars date to within 3 to 8 years of the resurrection. This is unheard of in historical studies.
Okay. I mean, regardless if it happened yesterday and someone told you about it, a dead person coming back to life and then floating up into the sky is physically impossible. So the fact that you are 3 to 8 years removed from that, and not only that, it's been passed down with a creed somehow.
Physically
I just don't know how that makes it more reliable that an impossible thing happened. If I told you that my house burned down 12 years ago and I have video evidence of it, I could show you that and you could look at it and you could believe me, or I could have used an After Effects program to make it look like it, or it could have been someone else's house on fire that I downloaded. It could have been a part of a movie that I took. There are ways to not be telling the truth about that, even with evidence. So not only do we not have pictures, not only do we not have video, not only do we not have even necessarily actual eyewitness accounts, we have stories of people who say they talk to people.
We do have eyewitness accounts.
And then they wrote that stuff down in a language, and then it was translated over years, over 2,000 years. And now we have a version of the story that has some contradictions and some arguments, and even theologians disagree about what parts are real and what parts were added after. And there's all this calls into question about the credibility of the text to begin with. And I just don't see how any of that even matters. If everything in the Bible was correct and testable, except for the resurrection, it would still not make a resurrection more believable, because we know it can't happen. So until we can prove the existence of the supernatural, that to me would be a step forward. But we can't. But trying to go back in time to the Bible and say, well, they told these stories anywhere from 3 to 8 years after it happened. People have told me stories that happened this morning that weren't true, or that had little exaggerations in it. So imagine what could happen over a period of 3 to 8 years. And not only that, but the story that they're telling you is literally impossible. There's zero records in all of human history of someone being dead for 3 days and coming back to life. So someone remembering it from 3 years ago or 8 years ago or passing down a creed saying it happened is not any more evidence that something that is impossible actually happened.
You bring up a number of points, and I was skeptical and didn't understand any of this until I started, reading The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright, and I have a number of others. Mike Licona, The Resurrection of Jesus, a new histography approach. They show that without the anti-supernaturalistic assumption that miracles can't happen, they looked at the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, the empty tomb, that it was discovered by women, and the low social status of women during that time and in ancient times. The criteria of embarrassment, again, speaks for its authenticity. This creed some have dated it to within 6 months of the crucifixion.
It doesn't make it more believable that it's impossible to happen.
It doesn't make it more believable if you start with the view that physics precludes the possibility of miracles. But that's why, as a classical apologist, I started with arguments for the existence of God. And if God can create and hold together the universe, then raising Jesus from the dead should be no problem. And when I do give evidence and look at the biblical records, if Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John were identical, we would expect collusion. But the fact that there are surface or apparent level discrepancies, it is an argument for it's in favor, because they weren't colluding and trying to get every detail right, but were trying their best to communicate something to their audience. So I think if we're intellectually honest, and I'm speaking for everybody, then we have to have an open mind and look at the evidence for all of this in a cumulative way.
Well, we know that Matthew had a copy of Mark and was copying it and making improvements upon it, things that he saw should be changed. So it would appear as though, they were writing fiction and were there in a writing room making alterations, making changes. Oh, it would be cooler if this happened instead of this, and Jesus should say this instead of that. And so those discrepancies are pretty major in some areas. But I think that what you've done, when you say as a classical apologist, you've made this argument for God first, or the existence of a first cause first, so that the resurrection is somehow more believable. I tell you that it's still impossible. And what you've done is you've failed to provide sufficient evidence that God exists.
That's what the arguments were for.
You failed to provide sufficient evidence that those arguments are valid, and now you're making a proposition about a dead person coming back to life and floating into the sky, and you're propping it up on failed arguments that also don't have sufficient evidence to be believed. So you're kind of building this tower of hope and faith on a swamp, because it's a swampland of that's not a very strong foundation.
David,
I would love to get into morality if
one more thing.
I would love to know how Christianity provides a superior moral landscape.
Before we get into morality, and I promise we will, but I tried to give many of these arguments. One of the arguments, again, is a contingency argument, the Aristotelian argument, and the Kalam cosmological argument. I asked you what premise of the Kalam cosmological argument you disputed. So instead of just saying that they're illogical or they're not good arguments, you have to deal with the certain premises. And the Kalam
That's where you're wrong. You think I'm opposite you. I'm not opposite you. You know what's opposite your claim? Physics, theoretical physicists, people who do
Okay.
have explanations for what they believe based in science, develop the creation of the universe, or at least the existence of our Earth. That's what's opposite your claim, not a guy who says, I don't believe you. I just don't
You
believe your version of it. I don't
you
believe your
s-
version of it.
you said earlier that I had some of these arguments were God of the gaps. Do you think your dismissal of the arguments I presented is scientism of the gaps?
Nope. I think it's a misrepresentation of what atheism is put up to do. You are trying to make atheism fail by forcing it to bake a cake. It's terrible at baking cakes. It's terrible at physics. It's terrible at evolution. But you know what's good at it? Evolution. So why don't you, if you have a theory of how life changes, you need to speak to someone who is an evolutionary biologist and tell them why your arguments are better than the known science we have. If you believe that God's speaking
Oh,
the
I
universe into,
believe in science. I believe in
if you
science.
believe that if you believe that God speaking the universe into existence is more sound than what theoretical physicists currently hold as the Big Bang model, then you need to talk to that person as to why your arguments are better than theirs. But as an
My
atheist, I can simply say your claims of magic are not believable to me. I will wait until the theoretical physicists have a more scientific answer. And I'm fine with that. That's an honest
my
position that I hold.
my
Let me
argument.
ask you. Let me ask another question. So I'm curious to know, because one question that I hear a lot of times Christians do ask atheists is they'll ask you, well, I want to know your position if you did find out that, say, Jesus appeared in the sky, and without a doubt the entire globe acknowledged that, yes, this is Jesus in the sky. What would be your reaction to that? Would you worship him at that point, or would you just sort of walk away?
That's a great question. And when you say without a doubt, you mean any claim or challenge that this is an illusion or a hallucination? All of that's off the table. I can't go to that, right? It's for
Yes.
sure Jesus. Would I worship him?
Yes.
You know, no, I would not worship Jesus. I guess I would have some questions. Would I be allowed to ask him questions? The
Yeah.
questions would be, about the stuff in the Old Testament. Did God really say, Leviticus 20:13 to kill people who are gay? Did he really, order the Amalekites to stomp out and destroy the infants and nursing children in 1 Samuel 15:3?
It could have been hyperbole.
It could have been, but that's why I'm asking.
We don't know. We're not in a
Did God
position.
order those things? Did God order those things? Under no circumstances would I would not worship the God of the Bible any more than you could be kidnapped and held captive and be forced to worship someone who was holding you at gunpoint while you were chained in a basement. If you were forced at gunpoint to do something, if you were forced to do something in order to be deprived or to not be deprived of food or shelter, perhaps you go through the motions as part of survival. But actually worship with adoration, something that has caused so much damage and destruction, watched so much evil and not intervened, I would say, how dare you? And no, you're not worthy of my worship. And I would take whatever punishment came to that. I would not bow before the Christian deity any more than I would bow before Stalin.
I've asked that question, SJ, to other people. That's why I don't think this is merely about the evidence. I think it has a lot to do with a person's heart and their preconceived notions of what they think is right and wrong. Earlier, we were talking about, apparent or surface level discrepancies in the New Testament. For those watching, I have two books: Encyclopedia of Bible Difficulties by Gleason Archer. This is a great book, and by Norman Geisler, the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. I've been studying these so-called difficulties anew. And the thing that I keep finding over and over again is a lot of these so-called contradictions in the Bible are just silly. I mean, I think a lot of them can be answered pretty easily.
Josh, do you realize what just happened? You made a comment offhand about my heart and morality, and then
just people in general,
and then shifted into people with my view, which would include me, and then shifted into Bible contradictions.
Well, all people, including myself. I don't look at the evidence merely. I don't just look at the evidence. I look. Nobody is unbiased and completely objective.
Talk about your heart. Let's talk about your heart. Where do you get your morality from, and is it objective?
I think it is objective because I follow something called the natural law. When you look at Romans 1 and 2, that I don't base it on that, but I can see Paul is talking about that. We intuitively know that certain things like rape and ethnic cleansing and racism are objectively wrong, even though some people practice that. But as with the sciences and as with theology, with the progression of time, we become a more sophisticated understanding of all those things, and that includes natural law. Natural law goes back before Christianity. It goes back to the Stoics, and even before. Aristotle and Plato talked about it some. But I think there must be a transcendent grounding of objective moral values and duties, or else we would live in a socio-cultural milieu that is merely subjective. So by the way that I and SJ and even you and all people, we live and function as if this transcendent reality actually existed. So we affirm the existence of God. We live that way. So I believe in objective morality, yes.
And that it comes from God?
It comes from God's nature. It's not like if God says, thou shalt not do this. No, it comes from something we progressively learn through time, through reflections, through philosophy, through theology, through contemplation. And I think we also learn it in devotion and participation of the sacraments.
But you said that atheists have no basis for morality.
They have no basis, but they are made in the image of God just like anybody.
So atheists can be moral. We're just not moral because
you're as moral as me or as anybody. It's just that
I don't know that we're the same in that. You just talked about that we know racism is wrong because of the nature of God as a Christian.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder why on October 27th you tweeted that you discovered recently you were 2.5% black, and that must explain why you like fried chicken.
That was
and then you went on to say, should I expect reparations as a black man? And
that was a joke.
It's racist though. It's very racist, and it hurts.
Well, as a comedian,
is this part of your? Okay. Well, as a comedian, you make jokes on a stage. You're on Twitter saying terrible things like that with these racist stereotypes as a classical apologist.
Well, I'm not racist.
Well, that seems like an immoral thing to tweet that I certainly would never tweet.
Well, okay.
As an atheist with no basis in morality. So what about your Christian morality gives you the right to do that?
Atheism has no ontological basis of morality. Theism provides such an ontological basis.
Your morality is not objective. Your morality is subjective.
No, because I'm a mere finite human being that also has a sin nature, like everybody in the world. I think Christianity, in my opinion, is the humble view, because it says we do have that sin nature, and we need a redeemer, and that's Jesus Christ.
Maybe you need a redeemer. I don't need a redeemer.
Are you without sin?
Yeah.
Well, do you think that's prideful?
No,
Or
I think
a humble
I
position?
think you don't. I think we disagree on what a sin is.
Do you think you've ever done anything in your life that you were guilty about?
Sure. And when
As
if I
have
hurt
I.
someone,
As have
if
I, and
if
everybody.
I hurt someone and then I apologize to that person, I don't need an external redeemer. And I certainly don't think that anyone really, should claim Christian morality is superior to atheist morality, or the basis of atheist morality, and then tweet some of the things that you've tweeted about people.
Well, I
about
would
atheists
first of all, I
being
would.
morons, and you have gone
Atheists aren't
on.
morons.
Well, you've said terrible things, Josh. You look.
The point is,
Let me say something. This is very important, because this morality comment gets thrown around all the time to atheists, and it boils over to where the Christian can lift their nose in the air and say that Christian morality is superior to atheists. And here's the problem with this.
I never said that. I said that Christianity
You
is
said that I
superior.
have no basis in morality, and you do. So let me address this. You have a tagged tweet at the top of your Twitter that mentioned something about battling with depression and that you're taking a break. I reached out to you. I sent you a message and said, if you ever need to talk, send me a text. And I gave you my personal phone number. You thanked me for reaching out and said, I appreciate you. And I said, no problem. And now here we are doing this debate. That was a month or two ago.
Yeah.
5 days
I
ago,
appreciate
5 days ago, you tweeted, atheists have no empathy. Now, why would you say something like that when you clearly had an interaction with me that was empathetic to your situation?
I guess I shouldn't have said that. Atheists have mocked me. I feel sorry for some of the things I've said also. And
okay, I don't want you to be mocked, but I will tell you, when I go through your feed, which is really all I really cared about, because that's how I came in contact with you. You have said some things that really light fires under people, and they attack you after the fact, and then you will say these atheists are being really mean to me. I don't think you realize how hurtful a lot of your statements are to people, and you paint with a broad brush. You assume that atheists are all the same, or that atheists have a certain belief. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of what atheism means if you think we all have the same beliefs, because the stuff that
I do know as a worldview that atheism
us on, we argue about within ourselves. We have debates about space and time, and we have fun conversations about what's on the other side of the universe, and what if time keeps going, and what if this expansion. Lawrence Krauss said on my show one time, if you could see far enough, you could see to the back of your own head. Neil deGrasse Tyson and Lawrence Krauss at one point were arguing through my show. You tell Lawrence I said this. It's a hypothesis of everything, not a theory of everything. He called his book Theory of Everything, tell him to change his damn book title. We all have these disagreements. But you painting with a broad brush and saying atheists are incapable of empathy, or I'm tired of atheists are so irrational. Why did atheism kill 150 million people? Like, you say these things that are broad brushing statements, and then people come at you because they feel attacked, and then you feel victimized by atheists, when in fact it's just a bunch of trolling on Twitter. So I want you to take a step back and know that we are human beings. We just disagree that your claim of the supernatural is believable. That's the only difference, Josh. We can still love you. We can care about you. We can be empathetic. We can understand change in our lives. We can have a basis for morality through evolution and compassion. There's an answer to your question. But to throw these out and talk down and condescend atheists on a regular basis puts you in a position of being attacked.
Let me say this. There are some comments that I post without thinking. I shouldn't do that. But atheism as a worldview can account for objective moral values and duties. And I do think in my heart, we are all created in the image of God. But atheism simply doesn't have an ontological foundation or grounding for many of the things that they affirm and live by. And theism, Christian theism in particular, provides such a grounding. And I hope you and others, with all humility, ask yourself, would you even come to Jesus, even if you saw the evidence? Because I think that there are a lot of good reasons for believing Christianity is true, and not just the morality part.
I don't have a need for
Well,
Jesus.
let me break in here, because I've had people post some questions, and I think we have some pretty good questions. So will you guys be willing to go ahead and answer some of these questions that they posted?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so awesome. So the first one that I have, and I think I've got 4 questions here. The first one says, to Josh Brister, why can't you accept David's definition of atheism?
Because when I look at academic sources, atheism is the belief that God does not exist. Perhaps the most eminent atheist in the world, Dr. Graham Oppy, a great person, a wonderful thinker, he has defined it that way as well.
I can tell you a Webster dictionary says it's a lack of belief. I could pull 50 atheists with PhDs that would say the same thing. There may be some who disagree.
Webster's really not academic.
I'm just saying, I just Googled it, and literally the first thing that came up was Webster, a lack of belief or strong disbelief in the existence of a God or any gods. And that's the general understanding of atheism. So
just let me finish with this, SJ. The historical understanding of atheism has been that God or gods do not exist, and therefore it requires justification. So that's why.
Well, the justification is that your evidence falls short. That's the justification.
Not a lot of people think it's quite rational to believe in God. And I tried to list many of these things in our opening, things we take for granted, like properly basic beliefs, believing in the external world, believing in other minds, believing in causation, things we can't prove, but we have good reason to believe those things. And similarly, the largest amount of or so many people throughout the longest amount of time have affirmed the existence of God for rational reasons.
Okay, I have another question. So in this one, I forgot I captured these questions. So sometimes if I didn't name the person who asked it, I do apologize, because some of these I didn't save the names. But it says, if natural law is something that we've learned more about and developed over time, does that not imply that our interpretation of it is subjective?
No. No person alive or that has ever lived is completely objective. Nobody is. We all come from it to the evidence from a certain point of view, and we all have cognitive and perceptual limitations. So just as we have gained and gleaned knowledge from the sciences from the time of Francis Bacon, and even before Francis Bacon with the scholastics, Thomas Aquinas, and after that, we come to it with a progression of time, with a more sophisticated understanding of the sciences, of natural theology, of morality, and even of God. Our understanding of God and all these arguments have gotten more sophisticated too. So it's our understanding and comprehension of what natural law is.
Okay, so let me go to, I have another question here this one's for David. It says, what is David's rational foundation for even believing morality exists?
Well, I mean, morality itself exists because it's just the discussion of ethical decisions. I mean, uh, that's kind of a gotcha question, because morality, of course, exists because we're talking about it as a concept. God even exists as a concept because we can have that conversation about it. But something that is moral or amoral, I'm an atheist who does hold the position that some objective moral truths exist based on solely the facts of reality. Using the mechanism of John Rawls' veil of ignorance, you can remove your bias and determine these things. Not to say that all morality is objective. I would say far more is subjective. But moral decisions, moral situations come to us all the time. You're in a hurry. Do you park in the handicap spot for 3 minutes? Do you roll through a stop sign when no one is to be seen for miles and miles? Is it immoral to do so, or is it only breaking a traffic law? From that perspective, morality definitely exists. Just the other day, I was with a friend who was filming their comedy special, and at the end of it, the crowd dispersed, and one of the cameramen couldn't find his phone. And it was an Android, and I have an iPhone. So I gave him my phone. He logged into Google. He was tracking the location. He locked his phone. He was pinging it over and over to make it make noises. And I stayed after at this event for over an hour, helping him find his phone, just because I know how terrible it is to lose your phone. And by the end of the night, we realized that not only did someone steal his phone, they stole one of the, or maybe two, I don't remember now, one or two of the cameras used in the shoot with the memory cards in them. So not only did we set up this entire thing and did my friend have a comedy special, and not only did he pay the guy to come out and do this, but now this guy has, a camera's been stolen, the comedy special's gone that we filmed, and everything has to start all over, including all the equipment. Clearly, one of us is more moral than the other, or at least acted more moral than the other in that moment. I helped a stranger look for something that had nothing to do with me. I could have gotten in my car and drove back to LA, no problem. And clearly someone thought, these cameras are expensive, I want to take them, I don't care who it hurts. It hurt the guy, it hurt the comedian who was filming a special, it hurt his family, it hurt everything. That was an immoral thing for that person to do, objectively, because it caused harm to people, specifically without much of a benefit to that person, because the cameras, on a black market aren't going to be able to sell for much. So we could get into the arguments of, did the person steal it for food and they were starving? Did they steal it to pay for cancer treatments and save their life? And we could have that whole philosophical muddy water discussion. But there are some things, according to the facts of reality, that are just clearly objectively harmful and wrong. I posit that it is the Christian who has the wholly subjective morality, because God says, do not kill anyone. And Christians go, okay, that's morally good. God is the source of morality. God cannot do something bad. But then God can say, hey, Josh, I want you to kill your son to show how much you love me, like he did with Abraham. Is it suddenly a good thing now that God is ordering you to kill your son? If God is ordering it to happen, doesn't it become good? If God suddenly decides that setting a mosque on fire is positive, doesn't that become a morally good thing in the Christian view? Or are you okay saying God can order things that are morally reprehensible? Well, now that creates a conundrum for the Christian. So you have to say that God is always good, and if God orders you to do something amoral or immoral, then you should do it because it then becomes good. The atheist can say the order is immoral and I won't follow it regardless of who tells me to do it, because a good person can become a bad person at any moment. It's about the consequentialism of the action as opposed to the being who said to do it.
Okay.
For those,
Well,
for
wait, let
those
me go.
things,
Okay, you go.
for those things to make sense, you need for there to be a good state or a better state or things that we ought not to do. You must presuppose some standard of goodness that transcends our mere cultural milieu of interpersonal subjectivity. Without such a transcendent external standard that is outside of our understanding of morality, from which to judge those things, we have no basis, rational basis, for which to condemn things. And like I said earlier, things like ethnic cleansing, racism, etc. Theism, and particularly Christian theism, provides such a ontological grounding.
So, yeah, I mean, never mind. We're not going to get into that debate, I guess. I know we have more questions to get to.
Yeah, I got a
but
few more questions.
I would say that just I want the Christian to remember, Christians watch, I want you to remember that the atheist can say something is immoral even if God does it. Can you?
Actually, that's called voluntarism.
That's
called voluntarism. That's different than essentialism.
Can you, as a Christian, say that when God orders someone to kill a baby, that's wrong? I can as an atheist. Is it wrong when God tells you to kill a baby?
David, how do you know that wasn't a one-time event
Answer the question.
In the Old Testament?
Answer the question. Is it wrong?
Perhaps it wasn't. Yes, it would be wrong unless I had more revelation from God, because I follow something called natural law.
Let me get to another question.
When God told Abraham to kill Isaac. Sorry, I'm sorry, SJ. Go ahead.
Well, let me just get to another. Actually, speaking of cell phones, my son had his cell phone stolen, as did my mother-in-law, and in both cases, we were able to track it on our tracking tool on the thing. Seeing it go to other people's houses and that kind of stuff was just terrible. But that was
these people. You know what they ended up doing is that they heard it vibrating and dinging. They smashed it on the ground.
Oh, that's terrible.
So when we did find it, it was unusable. It's just, not only did they not want it anymore, but they didn't want him to be able to have it. And they also took his camera. I mean, it's just so I can't believe people can be that way. I
can't either. I think it is disgusting. Okay, so I've got a couple other questions here. There's a few of them here. So I have the question, Josh. Wait, no, I'm going in this order. Okay. If you do something wrong, this is David. If you do something wrong that necessitates an apology, is it a sin even if you do apologize? I'm asking about the preceding action, not standing after the apology.
I don't acknowledge sin because I don't get my orders or morals from an invisible being. I think there are actions that hurt people and you apologize for them. And there are actions that are helpful to people and hopefully you're spreading positivity in someone's life. I don't acknowledge this concept of sin.
Okay. So let me go. I've got two. Actually, was Kip asked these, and there are two questions for Josh, and then I've got one more for. I think I'll have to read that to see what that one's for. But it says, number one, what's the evidence for dating Corinthians Creed to within months of Jesus' crucifixion? And number two, I'm also interested to know if he considers the 30% of shared identical material between Matt, Mark, and Luke to be collusion, and if not, why not?
Yeah, that's for Josh, for sure.
Yeah.
The reason why Matthew and Luke borrowed so heavily from Mark is because Mark was viewed as authoritative, which Papias shows that there's a long eyewitness tradition of Peter being the source behind the Gospel of Mark, and Mark actually dictating what Peter says. So that's why Matthew and Luke follow the template of the Gospel of Mark, because it was very authoritative in the early church. But there were all of these Gospels were authoritative. And that's why they accepted all of them rather than try to harmonize them. That happened in like the second and third centuries. They took those, and even the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Luke, these were not not eyewitnesses. The source behind Mark was, but Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses. So based on the criteria of of embarrassment, it speaks into their favor as being historically authentic, because you wouldn't expect two non-eyewitness sources.
What is your evidence for dating that creed into would you say a couple of months or years after the resurrection?
Well, I'm just repeating to you what a number of scholars have said about that. Gary Habermas, perhaps one of the top experts on the resurrection, does that. I've talked to him numerous times. N.T. Wright does that.
Okay, do you have the evidence though, or are you just telling us what scholars have said? Like, do we have what evidence are they using?
It's in a formula in the Greek that goes very smoothly, and it's in the style of an ancient creedal, very easily to memorize passage. And Luke and Paul even says it was passed on to him. Paul was at the Corinthians in 51 AD, and in Galatians chapter 1 and 2, he actually goes up to Jerusalem and interviews. Get this, he interviews Peter, John, and James, the three top ones, about the resurrection, about Jesus's life, really. But in the book of Galatians, I think it's chapter 1 or 2, he uses a Greek word called hystereso, which means to do an historical investigation. I remember Gary Habermas talking about this. Michael O'Connor has also. But
I think it's just fascinating to me, Josh, that if you were arguing for, who built a temple that we know exists today, or who was the first person to travel down a certain road after it was built, I think these would be important things to talk about. Well, this was passed down and it's written in a certain type of stanza, and it's kind of written in the ideas of this same sort of historical creed that was passed down, and it was typically pretty accurate. That would be great if you were trying to get us to believe something that was physically possible. But at the
there's
end
your
of
scientism. There's your scientism.
At the end, it's not scientism. At the end of your evidence, it sounds like it all makes sense. But at the end of it, you have to say, and then a person died, was dead for 3 days, came back to life after death, and then floated up into the atmosphere.
I don't know where you say floating up.
None of what you just said about the Corinthians dating, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or John being interviewed, none of that gets us any closer to a dead person coming back to life and floating. It's just, at the end of the day, it doesn't get us any closer to that becoming possible.
When you start with the assumption that miracles can't happen, or that you're not going to consider the possibility of miracles, or if you don't think history can affirm or reveal miracles, if you start with that assumption, there's no amount of evidence that will ever convince the atheist, the person that starts with that assumption.
I understand, but it depends on what you mean by the word start. Because I started as a believer. I started with the assumption of miracles. I prayed. I had one-on-one conversations that I believed were between God and I. I was baptized. I knocked on doors to win souls. I was the drummer for Christian churches and choirs. I saw people fall out with the Holy Ghost and confess their sins before man to be accepted into heaven. I was a part of that entire world. That's where I started. And slowly but surely, in researching these things and reading the Bible, I started finding thing after thing after thing that I went, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. And, here I am. So let's not pretend that I woke up like this and then started with a presupposition that miracles can't happen.
Okay.
It is the fundamental understanding of physics and scientists across the world that miracles do not happen. And there are religious claims that they do, without proof. So let's understand where we're
Well,
starting.
when it comes to history, we have a lot of things that are without proof. We believe it based on probabilities.
Right.
When you
but they're possible to happen, though.
When you look, well, we don't know what's possible. We don't know what's possible. We don't know if God does exist or not. That's why I tried to give arguments at the first, but we've been going back and forth.
The whole historical. Let me just say one thing real quick. The whole historical argument. You want to talk about the crossing of the Rubicon or whatever, the existence of Alexander the Great or Caesar or whatever. Nothing about those guys was ever a claim that is physically impossible. If that were the case, we would have the same. We would have these same sorts of conversations saying your evidence fails to prove that Alexander the Great ran across the lake. We don't believe you.
Well, yeah, with all due respect, there arises your scientism or trying to explain things at the level of physics. That's why I gave an argument at the first of this dialogue. What accounts for why the universe exists? So if there is a God that created and sustains the universe into existence right now, it's not so much of a miracle that lies outside the possibility of being believable.
So me adhering to reality, me adhering to reality is now scientism.
Let me just break in here. Wait, guys, let me just break in here because I don't have much time, and I've got one more question that I want to get out for Digital Hammurabi. I think he's the one who asked this. If a detective has a cold case with no leads, is he justified in telling another detective that aliens did not murder the victim, even though he does not have a theory of the crime?
I don't know.
Say that one more time, please.
Okay, it says, if a detective has a cold case with no leads, is he justified in telling another detective that aliens did not murder the victim, even though he does not have a theory of the crime? He doesn't know who murdered the victim. Is he justified?
Oh, I see.
Is he asking me? I guess.
I believe so. I believe so.
I don't know. I do know that there are other indications for why a person like Mike Licona or Gary Habermas would believe in the resurrection. For example, the historical accuracy of Christ predicting his resurrection. When you predict your resurrection and then it comes to, it actually happens, and that there's an empty tomb. I mean, you have this whole line of supporting pieces of evidence that Christianity relies on. And by the way, I put all this on a cumulative case, and I gave that analogy of a medieval knight, that all the links of the chain, the arguments are the links of the chain, and they hold each other together. So I think it's disingenuous to go at one particular piece of evidence or just offer one thing. We're really talking about worldviews, the consequences, the implications.
What he's getting at here, Josh, is if you and I are investigators and we walk into a murder scene and you're looking around going, we've got to figure out who did this. And I go, fairies did it. You can look at me, and it's reasonable for you to look at me and say, no, I don't think fairies did it. And I go, yeah? Well, you don't have an explanation for who it was. Therefore, fairies for the win. That's illogical.
Well, I would,
right?
Yeah, but
okay.
Is that really analogous to the resurrection of Jesus?
Yes. No.
Are you sure?
Not necessarily the resurrection. I think this was probably an earlier comment that came in talking about first cause, right? You're saying God did it. One of your responses was theism has an explanation. Atheism doesn't. That's the exact same analogy. What we are saying, Josh, is yours is magical thinking. Your reasoning, your explanation is magical that we do not have evidence for. I don't believe you. I don't believe you.
Let me just say, the resurrection of Jesus comes at the culmination of his unparalleled life and teachings. So this doesn't happen in a vacuum, but it happens in a context of where people are following Jesus. He's healing people. He's raising people from the dead. He's doing all these things. And if we leave open the possibility of miracles, you can't simply discredit or walk away from the historical evidence for the resurrection just because you believe physics precludes that possibility. You must be open to that evidence.
No, I must not. I don't have to be. We don't know that Jesus walked around healing people. We don't know that Jesus rose people from the dead. We know that someone wrote down that someone told them Jesus did those things. That's what we know. So let's not just take whatever's written down. Let's not just take whatever's written down as fact.
Why in 62 AD? Why in 62 AD? Why was Jesus' skeptical brother before the resurrection of Jesus? Why was he the leader of the Jerusalem church, affirming the resurrection? Why did the Jewish authorities put him to death? Why are these people, Paul, the skeptic, why are they willing to go to their deaths because of their belief? Because this is the answer. Because they believe God had come decisively in history in the person of Jesus.
All right, wait, guys, I don't want to.
I have to respond to that, SJ. I'm so sorry. Okay. According to that logic, Josh, why did the 9/11 hijackers fly those planes into buildings? Why were they willing to murder? Why were they willing to murder 3,000 people and kill themselves if Islam is not true?
That just shows we shouldn't believe all theological teachings, but maybe we should believe where the evidence lies. And that means we should be Christians.
But Josh, them being willing to die for it, is that evidence that it's true?
No, but they were in Jerusalem. The Jewish authorities could have disproved their belief in the resurrection. So this counts in favor of them telling the truth. It happened in Jerusalem. This Jerusalem factor, you had hostile witnesses that were present there. So I think this is a good reason to believe in the resurrection.
I think there's reason to doubt what you just said.
Okay, well, let me just, I wanted to say, you guys, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think that you guys both made a lot of very interesting points, thought-provoking points, and a couple of things. One is Sentinel Apologetics wants to know if you'd like to dialogue with him, David Smalley, and so does Praise I Am. He wants to know if he can email you. Those are two things that came in.
Yes, please. Yes, I would love to. Here's what I would recommend. Go to davidcsmalley.com and click guest. It's in all caps at the top of the page. Click guest and fill out that quick form. It's not a big deal, but it does help us to organize it and get me on your schedule. And I know that means you want to come on my show, but I can come on yours, and we can record it and have an episode of both of our shows. But just do it that way so that it comes to me as a guest. But be sure to make it clear that you want me to be on your show. Either way, we can record it for both. So yes, I would love to hear from anyone who wants to dialogue with me. davidcsmalley.com is the way to do it.
Great. So thank you. And also I want to mention John Maddox is having an after show on his channel. So if you guys haven't seen it, he's been linking his channel in here. So he's going to have an after show right after we stop. But before we do stop, I want to go back to you two and just see if you want to let people know. We know where they can find you. I put it down in the links in the description. But also if you want to let people know what you're working on or any final things that you want to make sure that people know here before we go.
I've got a live podcast December 7th at the Hollywood Improv. It's going to be a lot of fun. Anyone who's in the LA area is welcome to come to that. Tickets will be on my website very soon. I'm David C. Smalley on all social media. Check that out. And if you want to see me do stand-up comedy in your city, we're planning a tour right now. You can text the tour hotline to vote for your city. The phone number is 424-306-0798. 424-306-0798.
Great, thank you.
My name is Josh Brister. I was brought back to life once over 30 years ago. And I have faith, but my faith is reasonable and it's placed on the evidence. And I believe Christ will come again and will all give us new bodies and will be with us. So I believe we're all made in the image of God. And whatever I do, that's what I do it for. I do it for this. I'm proud to be a Christian. I think we're all made in the image of God. And thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you to both of you. You
Yes,
guys, thanks for coming on my channel. I really appreciated that. I think, again, both made some really good points. You guys, if you is this first time you're coming to the channel, please like, subscribe, and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
So I'm going to end the broadcast.